Hi everyone, this is Ruben, the project steward of Firo, and today we're going to talk about a very, I would say, hot topic recently that has been going around on Twitter, it's been going around on Telegram and various other social media platforms. And the question is, is Binance planning to delist several privacy coins? What is its impact on Firo? And also, how do exchange addresses actually play into this? This video is gonna be a little bit more informal. It's actually New Year's Eve, but I really wanted to, get this video out to address any sort of misunderstandings about what we are doing, what the community has decided, and the potential implications of all of this. So, to give you some context, let me show you the thread that kind of sparked it all, which was in the Zcash channel, or rather in the Zcash community forums. And you will see here that they were talking about Binance thinking about delisting several privacy coins, or basically, and they have categorized them into three categories uh, on of privacy coins. One which is those that will not comply with their regulations, which is probably coins like Monero, uh, projects like Zcash, which are thinking about complying but not really sure on the path forward, but they are given until the end of February to decide. And coins like ourselves, which already have a path forward to comply. Now, a lot of people are saying that, oh, Firo is kind of like bending the knee, or like bowing in the face of regulations and sacrificing privacy. I really think that is incorrect, and I will show you why. So the key questions that I'm going to answer today are: is Binance going to delist Firo? I can tell you it's no, not to my knowledge, and we have a good discussion with their legal and compliance team, but we'll talk a bit more about that later. The second question is: are you giving up privacy by introducing or using exchange addresses? We also talk about what exchange addresses are. And the other, I guess, are you bending over to regulations? Why are you doing so? I don't think we are. Should we still care about centralized exchanges? Should we just move to all DEXs and all these other avenues, or those that don't respect KYC or laws? And I guess the last question that I've also been asked, well, what are Pharaoh's plans to further improve privacy? Are we still going to move to mandatory privacy? What is your take on, at least my personal take on how to guide Pharaoh through this thing? Now, so let's go through this question first. All right, is Binance going to delist Pharaoh? Obviously, Binance doesn't give any sort of heads up when they are going to delist a coin, right? But there are generally warning signs that they do give, but sometimes they just delist without any warning due to their internal review process. And the only reason why they do this is because, well, they don't want like the project owners or the people running the project to kind of a dump in anticipation of a delisting. So it's understandable there. But I don't think, just from this post alone, a quiet investor was someone I also spoke to, uh, who is on the Zcash community grants committee. And we shared some discussions, like I believe in October or September last this year, and we were also discussing how we can, address these concerns that Binance have. So, first of all, I guess before talking about whether Binance is going to delist privacy coins, let's kind of try to understand that the problems or the challenges that they are facing. Right now, remember that centralized exchanges want to list as many quality projects that they can, because they want to basically earn fees. The more projects that are on there, the more fees they're going to earn. So generally they don't simply delisting until unless regulations prevent them, or there's a reputational risk, or they think that it might hurt their users, or there is a technical problem, or the project is unmaintained, right? These are, I guess, would see like the broad categories of why delisting typically happens, right? In this particular case, there's two kind of regulations, and remember, because CZ, Binance former CEO, has stepped down, he's under a lot of regulatory pressure from the U.S. Government and bodies, and Binance is also under a lot of pressure to comply. And as part of the settlement, there are regulators that are being put into Binance to monitor things, and even the new CEO, Richard, is actually an ex Singapore Monetary Authority Services regulator as well. So it's very clear that Binance wants to clean up, wants to comply, and obviously there are two main like pressure points that I know that they are under pressure, but this didn't come from Binance. This came from other sources, and from the direct Binance talking, they also have mentioned. Let's talk about this, right? Let's see why is Binance under pressure, right? Um, where is it? Okay, see, the Binance representative stated that their stance on privacy coins is in response to increased regulatory pressure, including MiCA, which is the Market in Crypto Assets Act, recent initiatives from U.S. regulators, which if you take a look, FinCEN is also seeking to impose strict surveillance requirements even on Bitcoin mixers and Bitcoin itself, right? And compliance to the settlement with the U.S. Department of Justice. So these are the few things that they have mentioned, and we kind of know what the stance of these three bodies are. And I actually recently, put a video on MiCA, which is the Market and Crypto Assets Rule, and they have a particularly specific piece that talks about privacy preserving assets. And if you take a look here, we talked about this in our post. Article 76.3 prevents crypto assets that have inbuilt anonymization functions unless the holders of those crypto assets and their transaction history can be identified by the crypto asset service providers operating and trading platform of crypto assets. So this is the law that all European exchanges need to comply with sometime next year. A lot of it is coming into force in June or something like that. But yeah, this is coming, and exchanges that operate in Europe have to comply, regardless of whether they like it or not, right? Or they just become lawless, right? The other one, which is the FinCEN, right? FinCEN has also, this is even worse because this isn't even law, it's just like proposed law, but they are putting pressure. And if you take a look, that even in Bitcoin, they are telling people that exchanges cannot directly accept funds that come from coin joins or anonymous sources. So you take a look at what Swan said. Please be advised that depositing directly or withdrawing directly to a mixing wallet may result in the termination of your account. And this is not because they want it. This is obviously something that they don't want to do, but because laws require it, they had to comply, right? And you can take a look at this guy. He's like saying that we have been publicly fighting FinCEN, but this is unfortunately what has happened. Their banking partners also don't want to piss off FinCEN, and as a result, this is also happening, right? But that the words is directly from or withdrawing directly to. They basically highlighted it, right? Which actually means that if it's indirect, it's fine. And this may seem kind of like silly. Well, I mean, like, if you want surveillance, don't you want to kind of like not just direct but also indirect. But it's very hard from a regulator standpoint to enforce indirect, because if you say the funds have to be 3 or 4 hops away, I can just arbitrarily just send it to 3 or 4 different hops and then goes in, right? And once you go past a certain number of hops, you will cover almost all of Bitcoin. Or like, for example, Bitcoin Cash, if you go back a certain number of hops, 90% of Bitcoin Cash has gone through some sort of mixer, right? So it becomes unenforceable as well. So somehow, regulation may not always make sense. And I guess I understand why people are like saying, we should not comply with regulations that don't make sense. But at the same time, they are there already, and there will be consequences if there isn't compliance, right? So let's talk about um, the third one, which is compliance with the settlement of U.S. Department of Justice. Which that one, I guess, is like just general. The Department of Justice wants Binance to be very strict on money laundering and all of that. So obviously they are under pressure to kind of ban privacy coins, even though there's very little evidence that privacy coins move any sort of significant amount of money. So I really want to highlight that this is actually a very, I would say, kind of ironic, because most money laundering in crypto actually happens in Tether, which is a US stablecoin, which is completely transparent, often happens on the Tron network, which is also transparent. Uh, you know, Even if it goes through Ethereum, if it goes through any sort of ERC20 or EVM type, it is completely transparent, and everyone knows, money laundering really, really happens with Tether, and yet Tether's not banned. Why is privacy coins banned? They want to be seen as doing something, and we are kind of like the low hanging fruit. And you can even take a look. Vice actually covered how the Mexican drug cartels with Chinese tribe members also launder money with the help of Tether as well. So, I don't agree with these regulations at all, right? So why are we bending the knee to regulations that don't seem to make sense, right? But you have to see, Binance doesn't have a choice, right? So I see this as a way of working together with someone who doesn't really want to delist you, but wants to find a way to keep you on. And if there is a way to do it without sacrificing user privacy, why not try this option, right? And centralized exchange listings, obviously it's not the most private way to get your crypto, right? But currently, in the current state of crypto, they are the most liquid, and a very central or important property of any sort of money or cryptocurrency is liquidity, right? You may be like higher market cap or whatnot, but if your liquidity is not there, if your real organic trading volume is not there, you can't function as a cryptocurrency. And of course, all this talk about DEXs and let's move to P2P methods, and sure, I think those are really good long-term solutions. But even in Monero, I would say a fraction of that volume of Monero is being obtained from DEX sources, or places that you can get them privately. I think it was a very, very small percentage of that. They all still mainly happen on centralized exchanges. Now, centralized exchanges also have a lot of value as serving as a fiat gateway. That means, like, if you want to convert it into fiat or stablecoin or whatnot, when there's fiat, there's going to be regulations, right? And this is, for example, like we have integrations with Binance Pay, with Travala, with all these other, even swap providers. They all use centralized exchanges at their back end. And if you lose your strong centralized exchange listings, at least at this point in time, all of these integrations also go away, which is really going to be like a huge setback to a project like ours. Actually, to any project, but more specifically, a smaller project like ours, which it really it really affects us, right? Now, I'm very aware of Monero. Monero is saying, we will never comply. In fact, they're very proud that they're not complying, right? And that's fine. I respect their stance. They are ma- privacy maximalists, which is not a bad thing. This all part of their ethos and all of that, and they are willing to take that hit from the centralized exchanges. At least they think they're willing to take that hit right now to protect their ideology, to say that we will not compromise on any sort of privacy, because that is not part of their culture, not part of the community, and that is one of the very good strengths of Monero. But I really think that they will be quite severely affected, because I this is just speculation. There's no, well, maybe not pure speculation, is that they are going to face a lot more centralized exchange delistings because they cannot comply, which would mean that people would need to switch to decentralized exchanges, right? Which currently, right now, they are not that many, and those that they are don't really have a good user experience. And we have already started to see this with OKX just like 2 days ago, also choosing to delist several privacy coins as well. Probably on different reasons from Binance, but maybe also similar, right? So this is going to be a growing trend. And obviously, I've seen a lot of privacy coins say like, yeah, that's fine, just delist all the privacy coins. We will survive and whatnot. And sure, I think many privacy coins will survive. They will be hurt, but at the same time, if we see a future like this, it also means that privacy coins as a sector becomes like a pariah within the crypto community, right? That means these privacy coins will be excluded from all centralized exchanges, uh, and serve in this little sub niche. And for some people, that's fine, that's good enough, right? But it also means that there is less exposure and access to these privacy preserving assets, and that to me is a shame, right? So there are different views on this, and I'm not saying one is correct and one is not. And the decision for Firo to implement exchange addresses is one that is good for Firo. Maybe Monero can't do it. Maybe they shouldn't do it. But this was a community decision. We had a community feedback session. Obviously, some were very against it, but the vast majority of the community understood the trade-offs and the pros and cons, and decided to express in favor of it. Now, if the community had hit back so hard to say that no, we will be really, really against anything like this, we will take whatever comes, we wouldn't have implemented it, right? So yeah, that's kind of like some background on whether we're bending over the regulators or not. Because the thing is that if we can do this in a way that doesn't sacrifice privacy, why not? Obviously, people are saying, oh, well, this one step first, then later they'll ask for more. You will never be finished with complying with all these additional regulations. And sure, that may be the case, but if it buys us time to build up DEX adoption, DEX robust cross-chain DEX infrastructure, that's also really important, right? Because we are not in that position, and none of the privacy coins are in this position yet today. And I really think it would be a disservice to the privacy community if we all abandon centralized exchanges without the replacement being ready there yet, right? Serai DEX, which is developed by Luke Parker, Kayaba Nerve, is one of Monero's beacon of hope for cross-chain dApps. Is also something we are definitely very keen to integrate and explore on. Is still not yet there. It's not yet ready. I don't think it's even in like a test phase or something. It's still in rapid development, right? And people talk about Torchain and stuff like that. And Torchain, because they have expressed that they're not going to list Monero, or because of all these privacy concerns as well. So even DEXs may not be that truly decentralized if the developer, the core team, or whatnot can decide to list or delist. So then what is the difference, right? Because if you can put pressure on a known person, then yeah, we have to see how ready what are they willing to sacrifice there, right? So yeah, that's kind of like really in a nutshell. And again, I am not saying that it is wrong to fight regulations, or to say like put the finger up to these centralized exchanges. But remember, the enemy is not the centralized exchanges. The enemy are the regulations and the regulators that made these really, really bad laws. So if there was a way for exchanges to comply without sacrificing user privacy, then that's it. So let's go about into exchange addresses and talk about what are actually exchange addresses. I have a separate video on this, but let's talk about, some people say, oh, you guys are losing privacy. Let's actually see how much privacy we are losing, if any at all, right? Now, so the exchange addresses is basically just an address type which functions exactly like a transparent address. The only difference is that it cannot accept direct unshielding from Lelantus or from mining rewards or masternode rewards. Because of the wording of MiCA regulations, MiCA says that you have to identify the holders of those crypto assets. And the way that many exchanges have interpreted this is that you have to be identified the sender. And the sender doesn't have to be a known entity, but they have to be seen from a certain address, right? So so that means as long as funds come from a transparent address into an exchange, and by the way, almost all exchanges for Firo and also for Zcash use transparent addresses, right? And of course, because with Monero, with mandatory privacy, they can't. But that actually has its own problems as well, because, well, with a centralized exchange, there's always trust, right? You have to trust to know how much reserves does the exchange actually, how much Monero, how much Firo is within Binance wallets, right? And because Binance uses transparent addresses, we know exactly how much Firo is in that is in with Binance, right? And that may be a good or bad thing. I mean, there's this ongoing, I would say, is it conspiracy? No, there's this ongoing like rumor that Binance is not actually having the actual Monero, that they are paper trading it. That there's the evidence is that sometimes Binance suspends withdrawals and therefore they don't have enough, which there isn't really a lot of evidence in there. It could be just like moving from from the cold wallet to the hot wallet, which is all standard procedure. We can't know, right? But with Firo, because they all use the transparent addresses, we can see that happening, right? And we know that they're transferring from a cold wallet into their hot wallet. We can actually see this live, because Binance exchange addresses are all known, right? So not to say that I'm for transparent addresses, but this is a benefit that well, with an exchange that is holding other people's money, this is an easy way for them to disclose to the world how much funds that they have, that they say they have, right? So that's I guess a benefit, right? And the other thing that I kind of want to say is that, look, so exchange addresses are basically just another type of transparent addresses. It's not, some people call it a super transparent address. That's not right, because it's just functions like another T address. You are leaking the same amount of information as a transparent address. So let's look through, right? Okay. So last time, so the main thing that Binance and other exchanges want to prevent is they do not want to directly receive funds from an anonymous source. And remember, this doesn't just apply to privacy coins. It also applies to Bitcoin, as we have seen here, right? Now, take a look here, right? So Lelantus J split, okay, this comes from the Lelantus pool, is unshielded to a transparent address, right? And okay, so without exchange addresses, this might have been an exchange address, and the exchange would be like, no, we cannot receive it because we cannot do this. So what happens then is that the exchange then says, well, if we cannot receive it, we have to return the funds to the sender. And to return the funds to the sender has to prove that they were the ones that sold and not some third party. And why is that important? Is because if you put a return address in, you just say, I'll just return it to whoever he asked me to do. I can basically use the centralized exchange as a money laundering thing, right? Because I put ill-gotten gains in, and then the exchange sends it out. then what, right? Then you basically, if it's not the same address, you basically pass through the exchange and goes out. You might be to a third party, right? And you basically allow the exchange to money longer. And that is the reason why exchanges want a known address that they can see. So if they are not happy with receiving that deposit, they can automatically return it to that same transparent address. That's a very important thing that Binance informed us, right? And we can be very sure. And this is like, because transparent address is transparent, I send from the transparent address, I return it to the transparent address, right? And the only thing that exchange addresses does is that it prevents this from coming in, so they will always be able to return to the sender, right? So now what happens if there is exchange addresses, right? So this is how it looks like. I have some Lelantus funds unshield to a transparent address, not an exchange address, any sort of transparent address. And then from the transparent address, let's assume that this is an exchange address. This isn't actually an exchange address, but let's assume this is a special type of exchange address that will actually start with an E. And now I deposit it into the exchange. Now, what additional info have I given besides directly unshielding? If I have unshielded it, the exchange knows, okay, this, I have received one FIRO. The world knows that I received one FIRO, but it comes from an unknown source. In this case, it has gone to one address. This address has no previous history. It's no previous history. It's only known that it has come from an unshielding transaction, and then this transaction then goes to the. So it only adds one hop. It complies with whatever FinCEN ill-guided regulations want. It satisfies that, and it doesn't change anything. We still keep the centralized exchange listings, right? So that's why I feel like, well, this isn't actually a sacrifice on privacy, especially if you already have transparent address. This is not a big problem, right? So yeah, I don't call it super transparent addresses, it's exchange addresses. And there's also a reason why, in particular, we actually say here we wish to limit the use of EX addresses to only those that require it. So that means from a user wallet standpoint, you will not be able to create exchange addresses. You can go into the command line or RPC commands and create an exchange address there, but I would say the vast majority of users use the graphic interface, your wallet, so they wouldn't be needing to create these exchange addresses, and they will only interact by sending from their transparent address to an exchange address. And that's fine. That's why exchange addresses are most likely only going to be used by exchanges that require this type of thing, right? And we can see this is all explained actually already in here. I'm not sure why people aren't reading it, and they just want to say that FIRO has bent over the regulators. No, that's not the case. Now, I want to give you some context what was actually asked of us to begin with, and Cellstar from I think and Binary Fate, who I think are core developers of Monero, were also approached by the Binance team, and they in September, early September, Binance asked us two questions. Do you have any plans to be a non-privacy token, meaning all transactions and address are fully traceable on the blockchain and no optional feature to shield or make it private? If yes, details and timeline and your estimated time you're going to implement this. And that was it, right? And that was really, really stressful for me because that was a warning shot. That means it felt like, wow, it looks like Binance is going to delist privacy coins, right? And obviously, I said, no, I have no intentions. We have no intentions to remove privacy on a blockchain. But because I was like saying, if I had just answered that, conversation close, we get delisted. And once Binance delists, other exchanges will follow. We've already actually seeing some other exchanges like Gate.io and OKX also taking tips also from Binance actions. We are seeing some, like, they are, I don't know if they're sharing notes, but they're definitely watching each other's regulatory compliance things, right? But then I said, look, let's have a discussion, because if there is a way to comply, because if you tell us what your concerns are and which regulations you are having problems complying with, let's see if we can address these concerns, right? And we went through a lot of different things, right? And I also made sure that the Ask Binance, I said, look, do you have a contact with Monero? Do you have a contact with Zcash? We will, if you don't, we will get you in touch with the right people. You want to contact with PIVX, anyone in the privacy space that we have relationships with. If you are having problems reaching their core team, we will help you to get in touch with the right people. So we really wanted to address this as not just as Firo, but with everyone else, that the privacy space that is potentially affected, right? And which is why I also had that very kind of long discussion with the Zcash community grants guy, who actually posted this to seek community feedback, right? So so after that, I was very worried, because other exchanges such as Huobi, they just delisted us without any discussion, right? So seeing this, I was like, well, if Binance doesn't want to open up discussions and just delist us, what can we do, right? But surprisingly, we managed to open conversations. I had a call with their representative, right? We proposed several things. We talked like about payment proofs to prove that the transaction can be sent, was sent by this person, so that they can return it. They said that's possible, but it would require too much work on their part, because they would need to have customer support to constantly ask every single depositor to say, oh yeah, sign this transaction and whatnot, which is also kind of like, yeah, there are probably ways to automate it, but it is a lot of work. And yeah, some people say, oh, it's for the exchanges to comply, right? But sure, okay. The other things that we also talked about, which Zcash actually like proposed the use of view keys, meaning that you register your wallet's view keys with the exchange. And that to me was actually a worse idea, because that meant that you are revealing your wallet's transaction history, entire transaction history, to the exchange, which means even the transactions that had nothing to do with the exchange are now being given to the exchange, which is to me a much worse privacy leak, right? So I also been following the Zcash forums. There were some people say, oh, we don't want to have a protocol change, let them use view keys. No, that's first of all not going to address the MiCA concerns, and it makes it much worse. It requires additional work from the exchange. it is may not be scalable because you have to scan all this other stuff, and again, it sacrifices user privacy. So we really were not keen on that, right? So we were also talking about all these other ways, to do things. Binance also asked us, would we be willing to blacklist certain addresses from receiving privacy transactions? We said no. That sets a very dangerous precedent. So even though Binance made all these demands of us, not demands, but they say like, can you do this? Can you do this? Can you do this? Where they sacrifice user privacy or the philosophy, we actually fought back, and exchange addresses is something we propose to say, look, if we create this new address system, would it solve all your issues, right? Because, well, it doesn't really sacrifice user privacy as we talked about, and um it's easy for the exchange to implement. They can easily comply if they receive any transaction they don't like. For some reason, even if it's not shielded, they can always return it to sender without any sort of user interaction, right? So yeah, I would say I'm actually quite proud that I managed to devise a solution, a simple solution that we implemented in what, a month, to comply without at the cost of sacrificing user privacy, and having a way forward. But we have gotten a lot of flack to say that we are abandoning privacy, but as you can see, we are not, right? So yeah, so I think that kind of like covers all of that, right? Now, should we still care about centralized exchanges? Is a question I already answered. With all those integrations, DEXs not being ready. So, what is Fero's plans to kind of further improve privacy, right? And there is still a roadmap to deprecating transparent addresses. We still want to steadily move towards it to kind of diminish the importance of transparent addresses. And there are few things that we're definitely going through. The first thing is that we a few months after Spark launch, which is coming out in 18th of January, right? Or thereabouts, depending on the block number. Miners and Masternode rewards have to go into Spark addresses, right? So that's great. Yeah. And I think, and also exchange addresses actually come online on the same time with Spark activation, right? And then after that, we will launch what we call Helsing, which allows Spark address collateral to be held in Spark addresses. So that means like masternodes don't have to use a transparent address. You remove that requirement for transparent address, you can still put masternode collateral in Spark addresses. Right? And so once you have that, you already have all new mining and masternode rewards going into Spark addresses. Everyone's increased the anonymity set. All our wallets will be default by private, right? So I think this will really, really improve the privacy of Fero already as it is. And of course, once we are very actively pursuing DEX integrations. If you have seen, we already integrated with Komodo DEX, or used to be called Atomic DEX, and it's also like Fero DEX is also built on the same thing, right? We are already on Basic Swap DEX, which recently launched their installer with Fero support. We are also going to have DCR DEX, which is Decred's DEX as well, and these are all P2P atomic swap exchanges, which are really, really good, right? And obviously, we are also looking at Serai DEX and basically any other DEX that would support us, that does so in a trustless type of fashion, right? So it's not that we are sitting there; we are actively seeking those things so that maybe there'll be one day that the regulations are imposing unreasonable demands that we cannot meet. Then we will be ready. We already have all these things, right? So people always say that, you should not comply because then there'll be additional compliance and all of this, and that may be true, but remember, we are buying time to build that infrastructure out. And maybe there'll be a day, maybe this day will come where these exchange addresses are not good enough for compliance reasons, but that day is not today, right? That day is not on January, where a lot of these privacy coins will immediately lose their liquidity to all of this. And we are buying time while we actively seek other options as well, right? It's something that's good regardless of centralized exchanges or not. Okay. The other thing that we really think that will improve Fero's privacy is the introduction of Spark assets. That means other people can create their own assets on Fero that would share in the same anonymity pool as Fero itself. That means, let's say there's a million people using Fero, all right? And then there's 10 million people using some other meme coin on Fero or a stable coin that is bridged over and whatnot. You're not limited to the 1 million or so users that are using Fero. Your anonymity set is shared with every other person that has Spark assets and other things. And that also means that those people that create Spark assets, they may not have, maybe there's only like a couple of hundred users of that particular asset, shares in the anonymity set of everyone else. So that also would greatly increase anonymity. So I really respect the importance of mandatory privacy, and there are indisputable privacy benefits on that. But the way I see it is that privacy is not a binary. Some people say like, oh, you either have privacy or you don't. That's actually not true, right? Because like, okay, like let's use the example of Monero, right? Monero's ring signature, people say, oh yeah, sender receiver amounts all hidden, they have total privacy, mandatory, it's full privacy. No, actually, like with analysis, like you can narrow certain things down. So that means that, well, the privacy isn't ultimate, right? There is certain leakage of data, right? Privacy, and that doesn't mean that Monero is not private. It is private, but there are ways to degrade that privacy, and that happens with all things, right? So, so in this case, yes, transparent addresses does leak certain information because it allows people to see the unshielding, that means see the amount that goes into it. But if very small parts of the ecosystem, if the DEX ecosystem uses Spark addresses, if everyone's sending, all the users are sending Spark to Spark and whatnot, master nodes, miners, all using Spark, and then the only kind of transparent address used is with the centralized exchanges, which already have your KYC data anyway, then that's fine, right? And we already have an exchange called nonkyc.io that has confirmed support of Spark addresses. So that's really good. If you're willing to trust a centralized exchange that doesn't have KYC thing, this is not a promotion, but this is just an exchange that supports us, right? They will be having Spark addresses, and we are trying to encourage other exchanges to also support Spark addresses. So I think this kind of addresses most of the, like, I think how long have I been talking for? 45 minutes. This was meant to be a short video, but I hope people understand that, first of all, there is no guarantee that Binance won't delist this, but from my talks with Binance and even from this post that seems to confirm it, we are safe for now, right? I can never say that Binance will never delist us. I mean, no project can say that unless you're like Bitcoin or Ethereum, right? So, but for now, I don't think there's no reason to think that will be delisted because of this privacy regulations, because they have actively said that our solution is acceptable, and in fact, they are encouraging other privacy coins to adopt our solution. So I think that's a really good sign, right? And so far so good. So I hope to see the announcement that Binance will support the Spark upgrade. Even though they may not support Spark addresses, they will support the Spark upgrade. So far, we'll be in touch with the technical team. They're saying that asking questions, and so far looks good, right? So I think we are safe, right? And I can give you the assurance that if bending over the regulations means that we will have to abandon or sacrifice privacy to an undesirable, to untenable degree, we are not going to comply, right? We, of course, community feedback will be a sort, right? But as you have seen, when even Binance are asking things for us to implement where it is unacceptable that we will affect the privacy of the users, we are going to fight back. We just found that exchange addresses was a way for both exchanges and the project to work together to comply with these regulations without loss of privacy. So, wow, what a way to end the new year. I hope this addresses everyone's concerns. And if anyone has comments at the book, please, before you comment, at least read this exchange addresses thing. If you're going to make criticism, that's fine. Just make sure that is educated and you understand what you're talking about, and let's discuss. I think my community manager, Batuhan, has also um, implemented, not implemented, has also going to open a forum. Yep, here we go. He has opened a forum thread for people to well, yeah, I'll get him to improve this post. But basically, if you have any opinions and whatnot, we want to hear from it. But let's make sure keep it constructive. If you have any concerns, let's see how we as a community can address it. And if you have any sort of questions about exchange addresses, about the regulations, or delistings and all of that, if it wasn't answered by this video, please do ask. So happy new year, everyone. I'm really excited about the Spark upgrade, and really, really thank you for allowing the core team and myself to steward this project. It's been an absolute honor, and we would love to continue doing this and pushing the limits of privacy. We have really, really exciting things that we are building at Ethereum. So thank you.